for a while, we had 100% of people that were getting hired. And it was creating a problem because students that were applying, um, it kind of looked sketchy. They were like, what's going on? Like, this is not possible. And we were, it sounds bad. I mean, I shouldn't say this. We were almost hoping that someone would not get hired so that the number would be more believable.
Hey, my name is Felix Tia. I'm the host of The Culture of Code. We invite experienced and successful tech industry leaders like software engineers, engineering managers, and product managers to reveal exactly what they've learned about growing and succeeding in the tech industry. In today's episode, we have Alex, the co-founder and CEO of CodeWorks. CodeWorks is a coding academy providing both remote and on-site programs. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, Felix. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, excited to have you on. So I'm actually really interested in the diverse journey that you took to get here. You studied political science. You attended a boot camp of your own at a Hack Reactor back in the early days. You spent time working as a product manager at a tech startup. You worked at Meta in developer relations roles. What led you to ultimately decide to start a coding boot camp of your own?
Yeah, good question. I've been asked that question a few times before. And the main motivator for me, there were basically two reasons. One was that I saw some excellent coding bootcamps being created in the US. A few, but they were really good. And there were no really good professional coding bootcamps in Europe at the time. And so I thought it would be interesting to create something here as well that was up to the standards of the best coding bootcamps in the US. And the idea behind that is that, of course, talent is kind of widespread and distributed across the globe. And then it gets concentrated in certain parts because there is more capital, because there is certain people that tend to gravitate in certain parts of the world. But initially, it's everywhere. So as long as we can give access to the best quality education in different places, we can facilitate creating these ecosystems in other parts of the world. And this is kind of leads into the answer to the second part of the why I decided to create CodeWorks. And the reason was to create an ecosystem where talent could be nurtured and grown in another area of the world. In this case, we were based in Europe initially. And then we actually nowadays operate both in the US, Canada, Europe, LATAM. So it grew from there.
And are these remote programs? I know that you have on-site programs in London,
Yeah.
Barcelona, and Berlin. And are these outside or the US or outside of Europe?
Yeah. So our own site, so we operate 3 campuses where we provide on-site tutoring. And those, like you mentioned, are in Berlin, in London, and in Barcelona. Those are 3 physical campuses that we operate. And all of our tutoring outside of that, so in the rest of Europe or North America, Latin America, we provide remote courses so that anyone can join and get the same quality of the program from their home.
Yeah, that's great that flexibility is available. I'm curious if someone has the option to attend a coding boot camp on site or remotely, what kind of considerations should they make? And I ask because I actually had a friend that went through another boot camp right before the pandemic. So they were on site and then the second half of it was remote. And it's very different, that kind of shift, which I'm sure is a lot easier when you decide to go remote or in person on site. But for someone that's deciding between the two, what do you recommend that they consider before they make decisions between going to a remote program versus an on-site?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it depends on what your priorities are. I would say to kind of get to the core of what I think is the most relevant part of the answer. If you're someone who can work well by themselves, and what I mean by themselves, I mean if you're the kind of person that can set their mind to something and being studying in a room by themselves and being determined, and then you're not going to be alone because the whole time you're going to be working with other people, but through your computer, through remote calls. In our case, every bootcamp is different, so there's no universal methodology. But in our case, you're always with people, but remotely. Physically, if you're doing a remote bootcamp, you are by yourself from a co-working or from your home. So if you like that setup and the flexibility that gives you as a way to focus and really be productive then and be happy at the end of the day, that's great. Then a remote program can be a great fit for you because it gives you more flexibility and sometimes it's less expensive. It allows you to study from wherever you are. But for some people, they want to go out of their place, wherever that is, whether it's their home or a co-working or a place where they're they're staying that it's not suited for studying, let's say for whatever reason. Yeah, so they want to have a dedicated place. They want to meet the other people that are going to work with in person. They like those type of interactions. They're very valuable for them learning. Then I would say studying at a campus, it's probably a better choice.
So appreciate the breakdown between how to decide between remote versus on a campus. So I'm curious about over the years that you run this boot camp, what do you think are some of the most important qualities between someone that is successful going to the boot camp versus that might struggle?
Right. So a boot camp, I think when we use the word coding boot camps, everyone thinks of one thing because it's one word. So we imagine it refers to one thing. In reality, in my experience working in this industry, it's sort of an umbrella term. So we use the word coding bootcamp the same way that we could use the word school, but there is a lot of very different schools with different methodologies, different quality, different types of programs. So to answer your question, it depends on what type of coding bootcamp you apply to. Our coding bootcamp is a bootcamp that is targeted to and was created to be one of the best that we could create in our geographical area and is targeted to have a professional outcome. So to work as a software engineer and get a good job with a well-paid salary in a respectable company once you graduate, basically. So in this case, obviously, to do this in 3 months, which is the length of our program specifically, and that's also why I said it's an umbrella term because some programs are maybe 8 weeks, some programs are 8 months. It really depends from program to program. In our case, to achieve so much in a short amount of time, there's a lot of hard work. There's a fast paced environment. There is a lot of motivation. Like you have tutors, you have classmates, you have people that make your day by day like very lively, very interesting, very motivating. But you also need to be the kind of person that likes this type of hard works, that likes to work under pressure, that likes to be pushed to their learning limits that like if you want to like just do a little bit every day, not push yourself too much, which is totally understandable and respectable, there's nothing wrong with that, then you would probably struggle in a program like ours. Whereas in other boot camps and other programs, you might do better because they are more relaxed. But then if you are a person that likes to learn a lot and push themselves, then it's the opposite. And then you would probably maybe be bored or not feel pushed in those other environments. So I would say the characteristics that in a program like ours helps you the most is a person who is resourceful, who is passionate about what they're doing. So as long as you have this curious mindset and you're constantly pushing yourself to learn new things every day and you're very motivated, you have this kind of go get things attitude, that's probably one of the most important things that will help you have a successful journey.
And speaking of aiming for professional outcomes and getting a job in the industry after graduating, I think a lot of people think about coding boot camps as the outcome of that is to become a software engineer. I went through boot camp myself almost a decade ago now, and I was surprised by the different types of roles that my cohort, my fellow students went into. That they're interested in other fields, and so they went in different directions, but all still benefited from having that experience, that now much more technical acumen that they got from the boot camps. What's your experience been like when you see the students that are graduating from your boot camp? Are they predominantly going to software engineering roles, or are there other kind of roles that you see within the tech industry that they're also gravitating towards?
Yeah. So in our case, once again, so CodeWorks is a bootcamp that's focused on getting a successful career as a software engineer or learning the skills. We actually offer two programs. depending on what your goals are. So that might be also interesting. We have a program that's 2 months where we teach all the foundations of software engineering. So you become a good software engineer. But then in the last month is so the third month of the 3 months program is where we train people to work in a team professionally as software engineers. So for example, we have the 2 month program that it's targeted to people that want to be, for example, startup founders or people that worked as product managers and they don't want to become software engineers. They just want to learn how to code. They want to be able to work with programmers better. They want to be able to understand their language, but they don't want to be software engineers for life. That is, to be honest, a minority of our students. So maybe between 10 to 20%. But it is, I mean, it's great that people wanna learn coding if you don't wanna be software engineers for life. And then for the people that do our 3 month program, we have like, I think I'd have to check the latest, but it's usually around 98, 99% of them work as software engineers after they graduate. So almost everybody basically. And that is something that, by the way, is interesting because there are other coding bootcamps in the world that I think have similar outcomes, comparable outcomes to ours. But there is a lot of other schools that don't publish these numbers. And some schools, for example, would tell you our graduates work at Google, and then you assume that they work as software engineers. And then you go to check on LinkedIn, and maybe they work in marketing. And so it's like, how is that related with the fact that they studied software engineering? So that's another interesting thing of this industry, let's say. Depending, some bootcamps are more, let's say, that there's more things to learn. The programs are a bit tougher. Then you're more likely to work as develop a career as a software engineer when you finish. Other bootcamps are more independently of how they sell their product. They're built to sort of get a career in tech, not necessarily in software engineering, but just understand some programming principles.
That some people might wanna go to just learn so they can do, better at their jobs that might kind of preferably touch tech. But yeah, that's amazing that with the 99%, I think that's all on the outcomes, 99% hiring rate after course completion. It says here that students who sign a job offer within 6 months and some cases with a work visa. How does that work? I'm in the US job market, and I think it's always interesting to hear more from outside the US about what the job market is like outside of the US in Europe, for example, and
Yeah,
having to deal with things like work visas. How does that all work for
yeah.
someone that goes to your program?
Yeah, perfect. So actually, it's interesting. So I just checked while you were asking me this question because I wanted to see the latest outcomes. Because another thing we do is that we update our outcomes every 6 months, and we publish them transparently on our website. There is a section on the homepage that's called Outcomes, and everyone can go there and see the numbers. And we take this very seriously because we think it's sort of the proof of whether what we do works or not. Outcomes is kind of the final, if companies hire you and they're happy and you get a satisfying job, everyone, when I say we, I mean not just we as coders, but the school and the students, we did a great job together. If that doesn't happen, something went wrong somewhere, right? So I think it's an important metric of figuring out what is happening. And also for that to happen, it's not only it kind of ties back into one of the questions you asked earlier. It's not only in the school's hands, it's also in the students' hands. So students need to be willing to put in their work. Students that just kind of want the school to transfer this knowledge and serve them a job on a silver plate, that doesn't happen in the real world. I don't know any coding bootcamp that's able to do that, right? Because at the end of the day, you're going to be a member of an engineering team in a company by yourself. So you need to know your skills. The school cannot be there to kind of hold your hand once you're hired, right? So in our case, yes, the latest metrics are 99%. We actually had the problem, the opposite problem, because for a while we had this 100% of people that were getting hired. And it was creating a problem because students that were applying, it kind of looked sketchy. They were like, what's going on? Like, this is not possible. And we were, it sounds bad. I mean, I shouldn't say this. we were almost hoping that someone would not get hired so that the number would be more believable. Now, obviously, we want all our students to be hired. But I remember once there was one that was about to be hired at the end of the period that we consider for statistics. And then we were like, almost. Anyways, so it also, I think what is important when you report metrics on outcomes, and this is another thing that each school does differently, is how you calculate these outcomes. So in our case, for example, we declare that we consider someone who gets a job if within 6 months of finishing the program, and if they're actually looking for a job, and they have a work visa, they get hired. So that 99 or 100%, that seems like a very high number, and it is a very high number. It's something that we're proud of, comes from people who find a job within 6 months of graduating, have a work visa, and are looking for a job. Now, these things might sound obvious, especially the latter two, but it's important because, for example, we have sometimes students that do not have a work visa for the region that are going to search for the job. So, for example, in the US, but they don't have a US work visa, or in Europe, they don't have a European work visa. Now, that is a factor that makes the job search much more difficult. And we are transparent about it from day one, or from minus something. When people apply to the school, we tell them, like, if you do not have a work visa, your job search is going to be more difficult. That has nothing to do with the school. That's just sort of a law of the universe. Because for a company to sponsor your work visa, you need to really outshine other candidates in some way. Because our experience, I worked myself in the US, so I was in a situation where I had to find a company that wanted to sponsor my visa as a software engineer. So I know firsthand how that works and how difficult it is, and how many companies had to apply to find one that was willing to do that. And there isn't a simple. If a company interviews a bunch of people and there is even just one person that is as good as you who has a work visa, then it's much easier for them to hire that person instead of hiring you. So you need to have something extra to be able to get hired. So long story short, it's harder to find a job if you do not have a work visa in that place. And we do not consider that in our outcomes, although the majority of our students have a work visa. Also, when we say within 6 months, in our case, the vast majority of students, we publish the outcomes, statistics of how long it takes for students to find a job. So 6 months is sort of our cutoff line. But let me actually check as we're speaking. We're going to do this live. The majority of our students find a job within the first month or two after the graduation. So we have sort of a pie chart that talks about employment time, and 53%, so half of our graduates get a job within the first month, and 94% find a job within 2 months. So it's true that we wait until 6 months to sort of consider, like, okay, we failed. But it's also true that a vast majority of people find a job within the first couple of months.
Yeah, I mean, even within the first month, that's amazing. Sometimes, even if you are already working in the industry, it could take about a month to get a job too. So that's very fast. What about for people that want to continue to work in European companies or whatever country they're in, where the work visa is not required? What's that job market like? Is that as, I guess, bountiful as jobs that require work visas, or what's the experience been like?
Yeah. So sorry, I just realized there's something also you asked me earlier that I didn't fully answer, when you were saying how's the job market, how's in Europe, what are the requirements, and so I kind of ties into this question a little bit as well. So to be honest, I think 2023 is a tough year. There has been a lot of layoffs, and there's been like massive layoffs this year. So it's not 2021 where people's were like just going crazy to hire someone. So we see our graduates this year have to work a little extra. They need to get a few more interviews. The salaries are not going up every 3 months like they were doing. But I think, to be honest, I think what was going on 2, 3 years ago was overinflated. I don't think that was a healthy economy either. And we've seen it in other ways that will be maybe out of scope for this podcast. But then now we have the problems with inflation, and that's exactly where they come from. So I think now like people are like kind of cooling down and be more realistic about what is happening. I still think it's a good job market for engineers compared to other jobs. I think someone who needs to find a job now who is well paid, where you can work remote, you're still gonna get a much more satisfying job search, probably in software engineering, than a lot of other professional fields. I think there's not a major difference between Europe and US in this sense. At least our experience firsthand is that the situation is similar. So our job search now maybe lasts a bit longer, maybe 20, 30% longer on average for a student. So where it would take a month, maybe it would take 45 days or something like that. And the salaries have not increased in the first half of this year or during this year. Sometimes they might have even gone down just a little bit. But yeah, I think it's still, I mean, our students are still getting jobs. So it's still good. Also, there has been the impact of AI, which is another big topic, but basically allowed companies to operate in a more lean way, right? One question we get a lot is, so now that there is AI, does it still make sense to learn programming? Sure you have an opinion on that. Our answer is yes, it makes sense for now. When maybe the moment that we'll have a very elaborate general AI, it might be a different answer, but we're still pretty far from that as far as we know, right? So, and at that point, then you could argue that any job could be substituted by AI when that happens. So it's not specific to software engineering. As of today, AI made it easier for engineers to be productive because you spend less time looking up documentation and doing kind of tedious tasks, and you can use AI to take care of some of that, and you can spend more time doing the architectural and the conceptual work. So the AI becomes the sort of assistant, like a junior engineer. So, but if you leave AI by herself or itself, it can't yet produce any sophisticated piece of software.
Yeah, I guess the threat of AI is definitely more inflated than in reality. We use it. I use it in my day to day as well, but it's definitely not trustworthy enough to just kind of hand off a project for AI to do. Does that mean then that the kind of role of coding boot camps needs to evolve over time? Because as you had mentioned, over time, maybe the value of a software engineer becomes more maybe high level, maybe designing systems rather than writing things that are more boilerplate that AI could do itself. Does that mean that the coding boot camps will have to evolve? I guess what's your opinion on how coding boot camps should evolve with the advent and the advancement of AI?
Yeah. So it's an interesting question. I think AI, it's been a good thing for engineers, even though some people were scared of. I mean, so far, I mean, the AI that we know so far. So I'm not talking about like crazy future scenarios where AI will kill everybody, because I'm just talking about current state of things, right? So far, it's had a positive impact in the sense that people can, yeah, focus on the more creative sides, the more architectural sides of software engineering. And so I think also coding boot camps, and in general, I would even go to say universities or any institution that teaches software engineering might choose to spend a little less effort on some basic learning of things that are procedural, syntactical, I would say, because those aspects, I mean, I personally think it's still good for humans to understand the building blocks of programming. I don't think you can understand the higher level. I don't think you can understand the architectural principles if you don't know how the bricks work. But maybe you don't need to know too much about it. You just need to know enough to understand what are the general concepts, and then you can spend a little more resources on the kind of things that AI cannot do these days. And I think most jobs in the near future will require those skills. But you still need to be able to figure out when AI goes wrong, because it's one of the reasons I would say today there is, to oversimplify, I would say there is mainly two reasons why AI cannot substitute engineers. One of them is AI is not able to do any high level tasks that require like any sophisticated app. To make a simple example, we try to build a tic-tac-toe game with AI without writing any line of code, just giving inputs to the AI to do it. Took forever for such a simple game. Like any engineer, any graduate at our bootcamp could do it much faster. Now this will get better through time, but we're talking about tic-tac-toe. So imagine any more sophisticated app, we're still far away from that. People don't realize, people overestimate the skills that AI has these days, which is not to say that it's not useful. It's super useful, like all technology, for what it can do. So that on one side. So one of the limitation is AI is not able to work with any system that has complexity in terms of different layers working together. AI is good at, like any computers these days, is good at handling complexity in the sense of size of the problem. If you have like a lot of data, it can process a lot of data fast, much faster than humans, like computers can do. But once you need to start reasoning how different pieces interact together and what's the right architecture for them and what are the constraints that you have and the use cases and all those things, and then AI really gets lost in that. So that's one limitation. And the second one is that it makes mistakes. Humans also make mistakes, but AI doesn't realize when it makes mistakes and it doesn't know how to fix them sometimes. That's why we still need humans to kind of keep an eye on it and check when things go wrong. And to be able to do that, you need to understand how things are built. Otherwise, you don't even realize where is the mistake, which is why we still need to teach some foundations so that people have that knowledge. But they, again, I don't think they need to know it so much in detail as it used to be maybe 5 years ago.
Yeah, and not to get too doomsday about it, but if AI can basically replace all software engineering, then it'll replace all jobs at that point, just because technology will advance so quickly
I think
that
so.
it can, yeah, you,
I-
it'll be a much bigger problem for the world. Not a bigger
For,
problem, but
for
a much
everyone,
bigger,
I think at that point, it can do anything.
yeah,
If it
exactly.
can have that abstract thinking and it can solve these type of problems, why couldn't be a doctor, or he couldn't, do any human job pretty
Yeah,
much.
exactly. So I guess given this future and a kind of unknown future about what it's going to be like to be a software engineer, for someone that's like on the fence about enrolling in a coding boot camp, what advice would you give to them, or maybe what kind of hard questions would you ask them to ask themselves for them to determine whether it's the right path for them or not?
Yeah. So I would say, yeah, first think why, right? Why would you want to do a coding bootcamp? What would you like to do after you graduate? So let's say you go, you attend a program, you learn. What's your ultimate goal? And for a lot of people, for example, that join our coding bootcamp, they want to switch career. They want to work in tech. They want to have a more flexible job. They want to have better work conditions. They want to be able to work remotely, possibly sometimes have a higher salary, sometimes not. There is even people that actually, it's rare, it's a minority, but there's people that have very good salaries and maybe work in finance or as lawyers, but they're just not happy with their job. They're not passionate about what they're doing. They want to do something more creative, and so they're interested in getting in tech. But for a lot of people, it's, yeah, getting into the tech industry, getting better work conditions and flexibility. Flexibility is kind of a big one. So being able to work remotely. And obviously engineering jobs kind of lend themselves to that pretty well, because of the nature of the
Hmm.
job, right? If you're an architect and you have to build a building, you got to be there. You got to check out what's going on. But for software engineers, because what we build is digital, then we can do it pretty much from everywhere, as long as the
Hmm.
company that you work with has that culture.
Hmm.
So that's one thing. Try to think like, what do you wanna get at the end of that journey, and then try to find a coding bootcamp that helps you reach that goal. Because coding bootcamp is only as good as it allows you to reach the goal that you have initially, right? So once you have that in mind, I would say talk with a few, at least I would say 5, 6 different coding bootcamps, get a sense of what their culture is like, how their programs is structured, get a sense of if it fits with your life and with your goal. Personally, we think that immersive programs are the most productive per unit of time. So if you can really focus for a few weeks very intensely on something, you're going to get the best results out of it. If you have other distractions in the middle of it, where you're just doing some hours on Thursday and Wednesday, then it's going to be harder because you forget some things get in your head, and but everyone's life is different, so you got to see and find a program that fits with your day by day. Yeah, it also makes sense to see what's the application process like at every bootcamp, because some bootcamps you just basically pay and you get in, which is not necessarily wrong. It's fine for, but then imagine that that's true for everybody, not just for you. So it means that anyone that just comes and paid, they will be admitted to the program, and those will be your classmates. So some people might be more motivated than others, and some people might be more prepared than others. There are other bootcamps that are more selective, where you have to pass a certain interview process to be admitted to the bootcamp. And so that means that then the people that you will find in your class are going to be more motivated and more prepared.
Yeah, I think that makes sense that you want to make sure it fits into your learning methodologies. I think one goal that everyone has at the end of it, obviously, is to get a job. What are your thoughts on someone that's an entry level person that's coming into the industry for the first time? Should they work at a startup or should they work at a more established company? I mean, in some cases, maybe you don't have much of a choice and you just kind of take whatever kind of gets
Yeah.
your foot in the door. But if you had to choose early on in your career, what are kind of pros and cons between working at a startup versus a more established company?
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. So it depends on, once again, what you like and what you value at work in this case specifically. Some people love to be in an environment that is a little unstructured, where there is a decent amount of unpredictability, and where your tasks are going to be very varied, and you'll have to figure out a lot of things on your own. And some people love that, and you're probably going to have a small team. But on the upside, you have opportunities to grow if things go well. You're definitely not going to get bored. So people that kind of like that environment and it keeps them motivated are likely to really enjoy working at a startup. People that like a structured environment where they have more mentorship, where their day by day is going to be more focused on certain tasks specifically, or certain technologies in the case of software engineers, might it likes a stable company where they're mostly sure that 2 years from now the company is still going to be there. They might have a better day by day in a more established company. In terms of being hired, it might be easier sometimes to be hired by a startup than by an established company, especially certain big tech companies. The hiring process is more selective. At the same time, my advice would be, if you study well, if you're well prepared, do not choose based on that. Because if you work, we've had people from CodeWorks that have been hired to work as software engineers at Google, at Pinterest, at Medium, at Spotify, at all sorts of big tech companies that you can think of. And they made it. And some people applied to these companies and graduated from CodeWorks and did not make it, and they got hired from other companies. But you should not give up just because maybe it's too hard. Like, try, and you will always be able to find a stable company if that's what suits you. Maybe it's going to be a big tech name. Maybe it's going to be a company that's less known, but still a very stable company. But if you like the startup environment, I would give the same advice the other way around. Don't go hire, try to get hired at Google just because it sounds great to have it on your curriculum. If at the end of the day, you're going to be working in a very structured environment and you don't thrive there, you like taking a lot of ownership and maybe doing full stack instead of doing just that very specific front end technology or back end thing. Apply to startups. Go have fun. Especially if you're trying to maximize your opportunities to a financial return, I would say early stage scale ups. I would say companies that have between like 20 to 30 employees and are growing fast might be an awesome opportunity financially as well.
Yeah, I think one of the best things about the career is that there is a lot of mobility. You could decide that this is not right for you, and not soon after that, or not that long after that, you could be in a new job in a completely different environment. And I want to kind of end with this last question, which is that given the 7, 8 years that you've been running this boot camp, I'm sure a lot of people come up to you and ask you questions, or have kind of preconceptions or prejudgments about what it's like to go through boot camp, what it's like afterwards. What would you say are maybe the biggest myth about a coding boot camp, and what's the kind of truth behind the myth?
The biggest myth about coding bootcamps, I would say, is that they're a scam. If we have to pick the most sensational piece of news that you can think of, I would say maybe some have been. And for a lot of people who take this industry seriously, we hate when that happens because it kind of brings the entire name of the industry down. But there is schools like CodeWorks and other bootcamps that are very serious, that are very good educational institutions where you can dedicate a certain amount of time and push the limits of what you can learn in let's say a few months. And to get a sense of that, talk to different bootcamps, interview with them. I hope maybe through some of the things that we went through in this interview, that if you check the outcomes of the school, try to talk with some graduates of the school, get a sense of how the admission process is, if there is any sort of barrier, any sort of selection there. If all these elements are there and people that attend the program are happy and get good outcomes, then there is a good chance that it's a great place to learn and to switch into a tech career. And it doesn't mean everybody should switch into tech, because there's a lot of other things in life that are awesome. Just the tech jobs are one possible outcome. But yeah, don't think that because there is some schools that get a bad rap, then think that the entire industry is like that. Be able to treat each player, each school as a new different thing, for the good and the bad. Just go talk to them, make up your own mind.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Alex, the co-founder and CEO of CodeWorks. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing your experience and advice with us.
Thank you, Felix. Really appreciate it.